The crisp autumn air swept across Harvard Yard, carrying with it the chatter of students rushing between classes, the rustle of golden leaves underfoot, and the faint tolling of the bell tower. For most, it was just another day in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But for Ethan, rolling his wheelchair across the cobblestone path toward the admissions office, it was the culmination of years of sacrifice, struggle, and hope. Ethan was not an ordinary applicant. At 17, he had already accomplished what many adults twice his age had not. He'd mastered advanced mathematics before his peers even began calculus, written essays that had earned him recognition in international competitions, and built small inventions to help disabled children like himself live with greater independence. Yet, despite his achievements, Ethan carried with him a heavy truth: society rarely saw past the wheelchair. From birth, Ethan had lived with a severe spinal condition that confined him to a chair. While other children climbed trees and ran across playgrounds, Ethan's world was measured in ramps, elevators, and the sympathetic looks of strangers. His parents, however, refused to let him see himself as broken. His mother, a nurse, taught him resilience. His father, a mechanic, taught him ingenuity, fixing broken parts, finding solutions where others saw problems. "Your mind is your wings, Ethan," his father often told him. "Don't ever let anyone cut them." Those words burned in Ethan's heart as he entered the grand admissions hall of Harvard. The building was intimidating. Mahogany doors, gleaming chandeliers, and portraits of past deans who looked down with stern authority. Ethan's palms were damp, but his determination was unshaken. He had prepared for this moment his entire life. He was escorted to the office of Professor William Caldwell, one of Harvard's most respected but also most feared admissions advisors. Caldwell was known for his sharp intellect, strict standards, and even sharper tongue. He was the kind of man who believed Harvard was not just a university, but a fortress meant only for the elite. When Ethan entered, Caldwell didn't even look up at first. He sat behind a polished oak desk, adjusting his glasses as he skimmed through Ethan's thick application file. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Caldwell's cold blue eyes lifted to meet Ethan's. "Mr. Walker, is it?" Caldwell's voice was clipped, efficient. "I've reviewed your file. Impressive on paper." "Thank you, sir," Ethan said, his voice steady though his chest was tight. Caldwell tapped his pen against the desk. "High grades. Perfect scores on standardized tests. National recognition. Even some inventions. Quite ambitious." He paused, then leaned back in his chair, eyeing the wheelchair with thinly veiled disdain. "But ambition doesn't always translate into reality." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had faced doubt before, but never so blunt, never so cruelly direct. "Sir, with all respect, I believe my work shows that I can." Caldwell raised a hand to cut him off. "Let me be clear, Mr. Walker. Harvard is rigorous beyond imagination. Our students are pushed to their absolute limits. We need leaders who can endure the pace. Your condition would make it extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, for you to keep up." The words pierced Ethan like a knife. He had expected questions about his research, about his goals, maybe even skepticism about his young age, but not this. Not dismissal based on something he couldn't change. Ethan's voice trembled but carried conviction. "Professor Caldwell, my disability does not affect my mind. I've faced obstacles my whole life, and every time, I've adapted. I've developed systems, tools, ways to manage challenges others can't even imagine. If anything, my condition has made me stronger." But Caldwell's expression remained unmoved, as if Ethan's words slid right past him. "Strength of character is admirable, but Harvard is not a charity, Mr. Walker. We cannot make exceptions simply because you wish to prove a point." Ethan's chest tightened. I'm not asking for exceptions. I'm asking for a chance to compete equally. Isn't that what education is supposed to be about? Caldwell leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. Idealism is charming at your age. But this is Harvard. We don't gamble on students who might falter. We cultivate excellence, not pity projects. The last two words, pity projects, echoed in Ethan's mind like thunder. His vision blurred for a moment, though he refused to let the professor see him break. He drew a shaky breath. With respect, sir, pity is the last thing I want. I've earned my place here, and I believe I could contribute as much, if not more, than many of your students. Caldwell sighed, as though the conversation was an inconvenience. I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. Harvard has no place for you. The finality in his tone crushed Ethan. He sat there for a moment, stunned, his knuckles white against the arms of his wheelchair. The weight of rejection settled on his shoulders, not because of his grades, not because of his intellect, but because of the body he had been born into. Slowly, Ethan turned and wheeled himself out of the office. The polished wood floors echoed with every turn of his wheels. As he passed through the bustling courtyard, students laughed and exchanged stories of their bright futures, unaware that one dream had just been shattered in silence. Back in his modest dorm room, Ethan sat staring at the blank wall, his mind replaying every word Caldwell had spoken. He thought of his parents, how they had worked extra shifts, how they had believed in him when nobody else did. He thought of his father's words, "Your mind is your wings." But right now, those wings felt clipped. Ethan's eyes burned with unshed tears. For hours, he sat in silence, fighting between despair and defiance. Finally, he opened his laptop. His hands shook as he began to type, not to complain, not to beg, but to tell the truth. He wrote, "Today, Harvard rejected me. Not for my grades, not for my mind, but because I'm disabled. They saw my wheelchair, not my potential. I wanted a chance to prove myself, but they didn't even let me try. To anyone who's ever been told they can't because of who they are, know that you're not alone." He hovered over the post button for a long time, then finally pressed it. Ethan had no idea that those words, typed in a small dorm room by a heartbroken young man, were about to shake the world. By the time Ethan woke up the next morning, his phone was vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. At first, he thought it was just messages from a few friends or maybe a couple of supportive comments online. But when he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and unlocked the screen, he froze. Notifications were exploding across every platform he had: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn. His post had gone viral overnight. Tens of thousands of shares. Hundreds of thousands of comments. His words, raw, painful, and honest, had touched a nerve across the globe. Headlines appeared in every major outlet. Harvard under fire. Disabled student claims discrimination. Rejected for a wheelchair, not his grades. Ethan Walker's story breaks the internet. Brilliance denied. Viral post sparks outrage against Harvard admissions. News vans lined the gates of Harvard's campus by noon. The normally serene brick walkways and Gothic towers became the backdrop for a media storm unlike anything the university had seen in decades. Reporters scrambled to interview students, activists, and faculty members. Camera flashes lit up the yard as protesters held up signs. Brains over bias. Disability is not inability. Harvard, open the gate. Inside his dorm, Ethan sat stunned as the world shifted around him. His inbox overflowed with interview requests. CNN wanted him on their primetime segment. BBC offered a live broadcast. Universities from across the world were emailing him with scholarships and invitations. Even CEOs of tech companies reached out, praising his resilience and offering internships. His phone buzzed again. It was his mother, her voice trembling between pride and disbelief. "Ethan, do you realize what's happening? The whole world is talking about you." Meanwhile, Professor Caldwell was crumbling under the spotlight. That morning, as he attempted to walk to his lecture hall, he was met with a sea of reporters. Microphones were thrust into his face. "Professor, why did you reject Ethan Walker? Do you believe disabled students don't belong here? Are you prepared to resign?" The man who once carried himself with arrogance now looked pale, his hands trembling as he muttered, "No comment." Students he passed whispered behind his back, some openly glaring at him. Caldwell had become the face of elitist prejudice, and there was no escape. The pressure mounted so quickly that the university president, Dr. Margaret Ellison, called an emergency meeting with the board. The media's outrage wasn't just harming Harvard's reputation, it was threatening to shatter the very values the institution claimed to uphold. Donors were furious. Alumni were speaking out. For the first time in decades, Harvard was not a symbol of pride, but of shame. That afternoon, the university announced a press conference. The campus quad, normally filled with students lounging on the grass, was instead packed with reporters from around the world. Cameras rolled as Dr. Ellison stepped up to the podium, her face somber. "Harvard University," she began, her voice steady but tinged with gravity, "was founded on the principles of excellence, equality, and opportunity. Yesterday, those principles were compromised. A grave mistake was made in the treatment of Mr. Ethan Walker. On behalf of this institution, I extend my deepest apology, not only to Ethan, but to every individual who has ever been judged for something beyond their control." The crowd murmured as she continued, "Effective immediately, Professor William Caldwell has been removed from the admissions board. Furthermore, Ethan Walker will be admitted into Harvard with full support and accommodations to ensure his success. His resilience and brilliance are exactly what this university should stand for." The announcement was met with applause, cheers, and a wave of camera flashes. Reporters rushed to get Ethan's reaction, but he was in his dorm room, tears streaming down his face as he watched the livestream. For years, he had dreamed of walking, or rather, wheeling, through Harvard Yard as a student. But now, he wasn't just a student, he had become a symbol of hope for millions. Later that evening, Ethan finally agreed to an interview. Sitting across from a CNN anchor, the bright studio lights reflecting off his glasses, he spoke softly but with strength. "I never wanted this to be about me versus Harvard. I only wanted a chance to learn, to prove myself. But when I was told, no, because of something I can't change, I knew I couldn't stay silent. This isn't just my story. It's the story of every person who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told they weren't enough. To them I say, you are enough. Don't stop fighting for your place." Clips of his words spread across television and social media. Millions watched, many with tears in their eyes. Parents of disabled children wrote messages thanking him for giving their kids hope. Students across the globe rallied, saying his courage inspired them to face their own struggles. Days later, when Ethan officially rolled into his first class as a Harvard student, the campus erupted in cheers. Students lined the pathways, clapping and chanting his name. Some held banners that read, "Welcome, Ethan," and "History in the Making." For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged. Not because Harvard had allowed him in, but because he had fought his way in with truth, courage, and the support of millions. As for Professor Caldwell, he disappeared from campus life almost overnight. Rumors spread that he had resigned under pressure, his reputation permanently stained. Once admired for his intellect, He was now remembered as the man who underestimated a boy in a wheelchair, and lost everything because of it. But Ethan didn't dwell on Caldwell. Instead, he focused on his classes, his research, and the movement that had begun because of him. Invitations poured in for him to speak at conferences, schools, and events about disability rights and equality in education. He accepted, not because he enjoyed the spotlight, but because he understood something profound. His fight had become larger than himself. One evening, months later, Ethan sat under a tree in Harvard Yard, the same golden leaves swirling around him as they had the day of his rejection. This time, however, his heart was light. Students walked past and greeted him warmly. A freshman stopped to say, "Hey, Ethan, you're the reason I applied here. You gave me courage." Ethan smiled, realizing he had achieved something greater than admission to Harvard. He had changed minds. He had forced one of the world's most prestigious institutions to confront its prejudice. And he had given a voice to those who had been silenced too long. Looking up at the centuries-old buildings, Ethan whispered to himself, "Dad was right. My mind is my wings." And as the autumn wind carried his words through the yard, it was clear, those wings had lifted not just him, but countless others.